Let's talk about what happens when the very system designed to protect children, well, ends up causing more harm. We're going to dive into a landmark report on the family justice system, and honestly, what it reveals is pretty tough to hear. So let's just start with a basic question. Picture this. Parents are separating, they're in court trying to figure out arrangements for their kids. How often do you think domestic abuse is actually part of that story?
The number is just staggering, 87%.
That's right. In a major pilot study, nearly 9 out of every 10 of these cases had allegations of domestic abuse. So this isn't some rare fringe issue. The report literally calls it the everyday business of the family courts. Okay, so here's how we're going to unpack all of this. We'll start with this shocking reality, then we'll break down the 4 big reasons the system is failing. We'll look at the dangerous idea of contact at any cost, talk about the real human toll of it all, and finally, look at a possible first step towards making a change. So you have to ask, why does this keep happening? Well, the report is really clear. This isn't about a few bad apples or a couple of bad decisions. We're talking about a system with deep structural problems. In fact, the original report that this study builds on found 4 huge, fundamental barriers. And these aren't just little glitches in the system. They are foundational flaws that actively stop the courts from keeping victims safe. And what's wild is how these 4 things create a perfect storm. You've got this pro-contact culture, which means safety can take a back seat. Then there's adversarialism, which turns what should be a search for truth into this brutal legal fight that just re-traumatizes people. Add in a lack of resources, not enough time, not enough judges, and you've got rushed decisions. And finally, silo working means that the family court often has no idea what the police or criminal courts are doing with the exact same family. Look, any one of these would be bad enough, but put them all together, you get a system that can actually trap victims and kids. Let's really dig into that first one, because it's probably the most powerful and, frankly, the most dangerous, the pro-contact culture. This is this deep-seated belief that a child having contact with a parent is almost always a good thing, even if that parent has been abusive. And nothing, I mean nothing, makes this clearer than this absolutely horrifying quote. A survivor remembered a Kafka's officer that's a court-appointed social worker saying this to her. This isn't just some abstract policy. This is a real warning being given to victims. Even near-fatal violence might not be enough to stop the court from ordering you to hand your child over. So you see, the whole mindset is flipped. For so many in the system, the starting question isn't, is contact safe? It's, okay, how do we make contact happen? Allegations of domestic abuse get treated like inconvenient roadblocks to get around, instead of what they are, giant, flashing red lights about risk. And this just shows you one of the awful results. The system basically creates a hierarchy of abuse. Physical or sexual violence? Okay, that's seen as serious, and it's more likely a judge will look at it. But coercive control, that soul-destroying pattern of threats, isolation, and psychological torment, it's consistently downplayed, misunderstood, and the court just doesn't grasp how damaging it is. It's like the court has its own special language to make abuse just disappear. It gets labeled historic, even if it was happening just a few months ago. It's twisted into parental conflict, like it's just 2 people who can't get along. And there's this really dangerous idea that if a kid didn't actually see a punch get thrown, they're somehow unharmed by it all. So, after all that, what does this actually do to people? These aren't just abstract flaws in a legal process. They have devastating real-world consequences for real families. This is about human lives. First, just listen to this. This is the perspective from inside the system. It's a magistrate basically explaining that the details of all that abuse, they're not really seen as relevant to the main goal, which is getting a contact arrangement sorted out. Now, compare that with the voice of a survivor. For them, the abuse is everything. It's their entire reality. But they're forced into the system where that very reality is called not relevant. The process itself is so stressful and all-consuming that it becomes a whole new kind of trauma. And all of this dismissal, this minimizing, it leads to what the report calls a process of attrition. It's like a giant funnel where all these allegations of abuse just get filtered out and disappear before a judge ever really looks at them. You have to see these numbers. Okay, remember where we started. 87% of cases come in the door with allegations of domestic abuse. From that huge number, the court only even thinks about having a formal hearing to figure out the facts in just 23% of them. And in the end, a fact-finding hearing, the actual court process to determine if the abuse happened, it only takes place in 4% of cases. That means in 96% of cases where abuse is alleged, the claims are never formally investigated by the court. They just vanish. And the result is a catastrophe. Survivors are made to feel like they're lying, and they're traumatized all over again. Kids are silenced. Perpetrators learn a terrifying lesson. The court isn't a threat. It's another weapon they can use. And worst of all, the court ends up making orders that put children right back into unsafe, harmful situations.
So where on earth do we go from here? Is this system just beyond repair? Well, the report doesn't pretend there's an easy fix, but it does point to a critical first step. And it all comes down to one word: accountability.
The number one recommendation is to create this thing, the Family Court Reporting and Review Mechanism. You can basically think of it as a national watchdog for the family courts, a system whose only job is to watch what's happening, collect the data, and report on whether the courts are actually keeping people safe or not. It all comes down to a pretty simple idea, right? You can't fix a problem you're not even looking at. The whole point is to make the system's performance, its successes and its failures, totally visible. The hope is that by shining a light on it, by creating transparency and accountability, you can finally start to push the whole system towards safer outcomes for families. And that, of course, leaves us with the biggest question of all. It's one thing to watch the machine and gather the evidence that proves it's broken. It's a whole other thing to actually fix it. If a system is causing this much harm, how do we make sure that just watching it is enough to trigger the kind of deep, fundamental, life-saving change that's so desperately needed?